Hello and welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to continue our chapter on Northern India, the age of the three empires. We're going to start with the passage political ideas and organization. The system of administration in these empires was based on the ideas and practices of the Gupta Empire, Harsha's kingdom in the north, and Chalukyas in the Deccan. As before, the monarch was the central head of the affairs. He was the head of the administration as well as the commander in chief of the armed forces. He sat in a magnificent darbar. Squadrons of infantry and cavalry were stationed in the courtyard. Captured war elephants and horses were paraded before him. He was attended by royal chamberlains who regulated the coming and going of vassal chiefs, feudatories, ambassadors, and other high officials who regularly waited on the king. The king also dispensed justice. The court was not only a center of political affairs and justice but cultural life as well. Dancing girls and skilled musicians attended the court. Women of the king's household also attended the darbar on festive occasions. In the Rashtrakuta Empire, according to Arab writers, women did not veil their faces. The king's position was generally hereditary. Thinkers of the time emphasized about loyalty and obedience to the king because of the insecurity of the times. Wars were frequent between kings and between kings and their vassals. While kings strove to maintain law and order within their kingdoms, their arms rarely extended far enough. Vassal rulers and autonomous chiefs often limited the area of the direct administration of the king. Although the kings adopted high-sounding titles such as Maharajadhiraj, Parambhattaraka, etc., and claimed to be Chakravartin or supreme of all Indian rulers, a contemporary writer, Medhatithi, thinks that it was the right of an individual to bear arms in order to defend himself against thieves and assassins. He also thinks that it was right to oppose an unjust king. Thus, the extreme view of loyal rights and privileges put forward mainly in the Puranas were not accepted by all the thinkers. According to a contemporary writer, Medhatithi, it was said that it was the right of an individual to bear arms in order to defend himself against thieves and the assassins. He also thinks that it was a right to oppose an unjust king. Thus, the extreme view of royal rights and privileges put forward mainly in the Puranas was not accepted by all the thinkers. The rules about succession were not rigidly fixed. The eldest son often succeeded, but there are many instances when the eldest son had to fight his younger brothers and sometimes lost to them. Thus, the Rashtkota rulers Dhruva and Govinda IV deposed their elder brothers. Sometimes rulers designated the elder son or another favorite son as their Yuvraj or successor. In that case, the Yuvraj stayed at the capital and helped in the task of administration. Younger sons were sometimes appointed provincial governors. Princesses were rarely appointed to the government post, but we do have an instance where a Rashtrakuta princess, Chandroba Labbe, a daughter of Amogh first, administered the Raichur Doab for some time. So this is important from examination point of view. The Rajputa princess Chandroba Labbe, who was the daughter of Amogh first, administered the Raichur Doab for some time. Kings were generally advised by a number of ministers. The ministers were chosen by the king generally from leading families. Their positions were often hereditary. Thus, in the case of the Pala kings, we hear that a Brahmana family supplied four successive chief ministers to Dharampal and his successors. In such cases, the ministers could become very powerful. Although we hear of a number of departments of the central government, we do not know how many of them were there and how they worked. From epigraphic and literary records, it appears that in almost every kingdom there was a minister of correspondence, which included foreign affairs, a revenue minister, treasurer, chief of armed forces, senapati, chief justice, and purohit. More that one post could be combined in one person, and perhaps one of the ministers was considered the chief or the leading minister on whom the king leaned more than the others. It could be termed as the Pradhan Mantri. All the ministers except the Purohita were expected to lead military campaigns as well when called upon to do so. We also hear of officials of the royal household. Antapur, since the king was the fountainhead of all power, some of the officials of a household became very powerful. The armed forces were very important for the maintenance and expansion of the empire. We have already cited evidence from Arab travelers that the Pala, Pratihara, and Rajkota kings had large and well organized infantry and cavalry and large number of war elephants. Elephants were supposed to be elements of strength and were greatly prized. The largest number of elephants were maintained by the Pala kings. Large number of horses were imported both by Rajkota and Pratihara kings by sea from Arabia in West Asia and over land from Khorasan in East Persia and Central Asia. So there was an import of horses in a large number by sea from Arabia and West Asia and over land from Khorasan, which is in East Persia and Central Asia. The Pratihara kings are believed to have had the finest cavalry in the country. There are no references to war chariots which had fallen out of use. Some of the kings, especially the Rajputas, had a large number of forts. They were garrisoned by special troops and had their own independent commanders. The infantry consisted of regular and irregular troops and of levies provided by the vassal chiefs. The regular troops were often hereditary and sometimes drawn from different regions of all over India. Thus, the Pala infantry consisted of soldiers from Malwa, Khasa in Assam, Lata, South Gujarat, and Karnataka. The Pala kings and perhaps the Rashtrakutas had their own navies, but we do not know much about their strength and organization. So the Pala kings and the Rashtrakutas had their own navies as well. The empires consisted of area administered directly and areas ruled over by the vassal chiefs. So there were two kind of areas, one that were administered directly by the ruler and others which were ruled over by the vassal chiefs. The latter were autonomous as far as their internal affairs were concerned and had a general obligation of loyalty, paying fixed tribute and supplying the quota of troops to the overlord. Sometimes a son of vassal chief was required to stay in attendance of the overlord to guard against rebellion. The vassal chiefs were required to attend the darbar of the overlord on special occasions, and sometimes they were required to marry one of their daughters to the overlord or to one of his sons. But the vassal chiefs always aspired to be independent, and wars between them and the overlord were very frequent. Thus, the Rajputas had to fight constantly against the vassal chiefs of Vengi, Andhra, and Karnataka. The Pratiharas had to fight against the Paramars of Malwa and the Chandelas of Bundelkhand. The directly administered territories in the Pala and Pratihara empires were divided into Bhukti provinces and Mandala or Visaya districts. So, Bhuktis were the provinces and Mandala or Visaya were the districts. The governor of a province was called Uparika and the head of the district Visyapati. The Uparika was expected to collect land revenue and maintain law and order with the help of the army. The Visyapati was expected to do the same within his jurisdiction. During the period, there was an increase of smaller chieftains called Samantas or Bhogapatis who dominated over a number of villages. The Vishyapatis and these smaller chiefs tended to merge with each other, and later on, the word Samanta began to be used indiscriminately for both of them. So the word Samanta was basically uh, in association with the ones who dominated a large number of villages. They were also called as Bhogapatis, but in due time, the Samantas and the Vishyapatis, these terms coalesced and the word Samanta began to be used indiscriminately for both the district administrators as well as the ones who dominated a large number of villages. In the Rajputta kingdom, the directly administered areas were divided into Rashtra, provinces, Vishya, and Bhukti. So the administrative structure of the Rajputta kingdoms was in order of Rashtrakutas, was in the order of Rashtras, which were the provinces, then the Vishyas, and then the Bhuktis. However, in the Prala and Pratyahara kingdoms, it was the Bhuktis, which were the provinces, the Mandala or Vishya, which were the districts, and the uh, lower units or the villages as well. So there is a reversal of the terms over here. We could see in the Rajput kingdoms, it is the Rashtras, which were the provinces, and then the Vishyas, and then the Bhuktis. The head of the Rashtra was called Rashtrapati. He performed the same functions as the Varika did in the Pala and the Pratihara empires. The Vishya was like a modern district, and the Bhukti was a smaller unit to it. In the Pala and Pratihara empires, the unit below the Vishya was called Pattala. So over here, we could say that for Pala and Pratihara, it was the then Mandala or Vishya, and then the Pattala. For Rashtrakutas, it is the Rashtra, then Visaya, and then the Bhukti. So Bhukti was basically a smaller unit to the districts. The precise role of these smaller units is not known. It seems that their main purpose was the realization of land revenue and some attention to law and order. Apparently, all the officials were paid by giving them grants of rent-free land. This tended to blur the distinction between local officials and the hereditary chiefs and smaller vassals. Similarly, the Rashtrapati or governor sometimes enjoyed the status and title of a vassal king. Below these territorial divisions was the village. The village was the basic unit of administration. The village administration was carried on by the village headman and the village accountant, whose posts were directly hereditary. They were paid by grants of rent free lands. The headman was often held in his duties by the village elders called Grama Mahajan or Grama Mahatara. In the Rashtrakuta kingdom, particularly in Karnataka, we are told that there were village committees to manage local schools, tanks, temples, and roads. They could also receive money or property in trust and manage them. These subcommittees worked in close cooperation with the headman and received percentage of the land revenue collection revenue collection. Simple disputes were also decided by these committees. Towns had similar committee to which the heads of trade guilds were also associated. Law and order in the towns and in areas in their immediate vicinity was the responsibility of the Koshtapal or Kotwal, a figure made familiar through many stories. An important feature of the period was the rise in the Deccan of hereditary revenue officers called Nath Gamundas or Deshagramutas or Deshagramakutas. So there was an important feature in this period, and it was the rise of the Deccan hereditary revenue officers called Nav Nad Gavundas or Deshagramakutas. They appear to have discharged the same function as the Deshmukhs and Deshpandes of later times in Maharashtra. This development, along with the petty chieftainships in North India, which we have just mentioned, had an important bearing on society and politics. As the power of these hereditary elements grew, the village committees became weaker. The central ruler also found it difficult to assert his authority over them and to control them. This is what we mean when we say that the government was becoming feudalized. So there was basically a rise in the power of the hereditary chiefs, and because of this, the village committee was losing its power, and also it was difficult for the actual ruler to manage them because they were trying to because the new hereditary elements were trying to gain power, and it was difficult to control them, or it was difficult to assert the ruler's authority over them. So this leads to the feudalization of the government. The government was becoming feudalized. Another point to bear in mind is the relationship of state and religion during the time. Many of the rulers of that time were devout followers of Shiva or Vishnu, or they followed the teachings of Buddhism or Jainism. They made handsome donations to the Brahmanas or the Buddhist viharas or the Jain temples. But generally, they gave patronage to all the faiths and did not persecute anyone for his or her religious belief. Muslims were also welcomed and allowed to preach their faith by the Rajputa kings. Normally, a king was not expected to interfere with the customs or the code of conduct prescribed by the law books called the Dharma Shastras. But he did have the general duty of protecting Brahmanas and maintaining the division of the society into four states or varnas. So it was a duty of the king to protect the Brahmanas and maintain the division of the society into four states or varnas. The Purohitas were expected to guide the king in this matter, but it should not be thought that the Purohit interfered with state affairs or dominated the king. Medha Tithi, the foremost expounder of Dharma Shastra in this period, says that the king's authority was derived from the Dharma Shastras, including the Vedas, and from Arthashastra or the science of polity. His public duty or Raj Dharma was to be based on the Arthashastra, that is, the principles of politics. This really meant that politics and religion were, in a sense, kept apart, religion being essentially a personal duty of the king. Thus, the kings were not dominated by the priest or by the sacred law expounded by them. Religion was, however, important for legitimizing and strengthening the position of the rulers. Many of the rulers therefore built grand temples, often at their capitals, and gave handsome land grants for maintenance of temples and to the Brahmanas. So, with this, we have come to an end of this chapter on Northern India. I hope you would have liked it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Till then, see ya. Bye.